I'm Marisha Chamberlain. I'm a writer. I write, I'm one of those switch hitter writers. I write in a number of forms. I've written and had lots of plays produced. In this time of my life, I'm writing novel-length fiction. That's my main focus. But I also write lyrics for music and libretti. So all of those, I love all the different forms. I'm not from Minnesota, but I may as well be because I've lived here since 1969. I started writing really young, and it was partly because I had an English professor father who wanted to write himself, and lots and lots of books in the house, like what we have here in my loft. And the whole business of having a chance to create something where you're reflecting and you're telling what you see and hear, but also what you feel, and trying to make something of what's around you and what your experience is, make something that you can then hand to the world as a gift. This is what it was like when I was alive. Everything that I write is some element of that. And for a working life, that is such a pure joy. Even when it's frustrating, the act of taking that whole, everything that you're seeing and hearing and feeling, and bringing it out of yourself and then maybe working on it for a very long time. 20 drafts are nothing for me until it's absolutely as clear as I can make it. Also, it's something that as I get older, as long as I keep fairly fit, I have the stamina and the brain power to continue to do. I don't have to retire. I think of Vladimir Nabokov writing right into his 90s. I mean, that to me, that's a happy work life. I think Minnesotans, when we're at our best, we're really interested in other people. And there's a lot of debate about Minnesota nice and Minnesota ice. And my experience has been that if I overcome my shyness, most people want to say hello. And I think that that's Minnesota nice, that business of having actual curiosity about other people. And I've got that. Well, I have a schedule. I get up, and the first thing I do is to go to this standing desk here. Because part of the thing for being a writer is that you have to handle the problem of a sedentary work. I'm sitting now. I stand there and I write for an hour first thing in the day. And then I pack up my laptop and go over to the atrium in the other building here at Schmidt Artist Lofts. And in the bright light from there and the chill, which I like, I write for another hour. And now in my 60s, I need a nap in the afternoon. But if I've gotten up at 7:30 and I've written through to 1 o'clock with a couple of little breaks to have meals, I can take a nap with a sense of, what's the word, of virtue. I have put in a good work morning and I've got my virtue. And so then I get up from my nap and then I work on sort of day job kind of things. I don't actually have a day job. I have a nonprofit that I run and I do consulting work, but I still think of it as a day job. So, but I try to put in a couple of hours in the afternoon. When you're writing long-form prose, which is what I'm writing now, it is time-intensive and labor-intensive. In the past, it's taken me between a month and 3 months to write a play. By comparison, it took me 10 years to write my first novel. So there's a real difference between the particulars of what you're doing. And I wrote a book of poems over the course of several years, but still, it was individual poems. And even though I had continuity of my voice and of certain themes, if I'd finished a poem, I didn't have to carry the characters and the story, I didn't have to carry it on into the next day. So the fact that with a novel that you do that is, I have to say, it is so much fun. It's like having a double life. And one of them is purely imagination. And it's especially fun because you're always using your own life, even if you think you aren't, as a novelist. And invariably, I've managed to work through something that really bewildered me, or embarrassed me, or terrified me in the course of completing a work. And then when I was finished, when I'd gotten through all the drafts, no matter how long it took me, when I was done with that. This is my grandmother, and she was a novelist. I've got a dozen of her novels on my bookshelf. And she also had a very wild life with lots of moving around. And this is her second husband, Mario Luigi Federico Randina, the painter. And knowing how hard it was on me as a kid to be moved around all the time, and also seeing some of the effects on my mother, because she's my maternal grandmother, I decided that I was going to dig in and write a family saga. And the working title is Nude Ascending a Suitcase. The famous Cubist painting, Nude Descending a Staircase. I'm turning that around, and that suitcase right there, that old leather suitcase, would be about the same era as my grandmother, traveling across the Atlantic on a freighter with 3 tiny children, my mother being 3 years old. To meet Mario, she was headed from Boston to Gibraltar, and she did not know where he was in Europe. She knew he was in Spain or Portugal, probably, but they had a language barrier between them, and the telegrams that they were sending back and forth were like a double monologue. So that she went anyway. She went anyway. I'm going to find Mario, and then dragging these kids through that too. That's the beginning of this new novel, Nude Ascending a Suitcase. So that's what I'm working on. And I love to travel myself, so I consider travel to be a good thing. It's become popular to say, in response to a huge emotional event, particularly a tragedy, it's become popular to say, I have no words. And that irritates the hell out of me, because somebody is using words to say they have no words. And so I encourage people to say, if they're saying, I'm not ready to talk about this, or I'm not ready to write about it, I have no words yet. Because there's nothing wrong with words. And when people say, a picture is better than 1,000 words, that's not so. 1,000 words can make a series of pictures that you will never forget. There's nothing wrong with words. The fact that we all talk tends to, or most of us talk, tends to make us devalue words because they're commonplace. But that does not mean that words should be devalued. So they're the paints, they're the notes, and they've got sound. They're musical. They can hold. Why I decided to be a writer, instead of all the different art forms that beckoned, is because I felt that I could bring out of me everything that I had to give with words. How about the rule of threes? I'll come up with three pieces of advice. One is to write every day. The second is to read, and don't be afraid of other influences. Read like crazy and read everything. And the third is pay attention all the time, as much as possible, and take notes as you go through your day. That gets that whole system of reflecting and then writing and reflecting and paying attention and letting the world in, not keeping it out. And the reading is so important because you learn craft as much from imitation as you do from, say, a writing class. And by really paying attention and reading closely to something that you admire, you can really absorb how the sentences are put together. And I'm not above taking a paragraph that I really admire and typing it out so that I can really feel in my fingers, or writing it out longhand, how those sentences come together, get the carpentry of it. So, yeah, it really is the craft of plumbers, mechanics, and carpenters. I stole that from the poet Diana Wilkowski, but it's making something.